Hi there, this is a video accompanying the Joomla tutorial series developing an MVC component, and this time we're looking at using the language filter facility, which is all about making our Hello World component support multiple languages. Now I'm going to split this step into two videos, and in the first video I'm going to cover all of the multilingual aspects, and then in the second video I'll look at the categories APIs and the revised router functionality. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to build the data configuration to make the site multilingual. And there's a really good tutorial how to set up a multilingual Joomla site, and that's really what you should follow in order to get your site set up correctly. It can be a bit confusing just seeing this for the first time. So what I'm going to do is really just go through the steps and show you what you kind of should expect to end up with, and look in a bit more detail at some of the plugins and modules along the way. The first thing is installing a new language, and if we go to our administrator and extensions, you see language, and if you click on language you get the option here to install languages, and you can click on that and select whatever language you want to install. What I've done is I've installed these languages: English GB, English NZ, really just the New Zealand there, to make it clear that these are separate languages from the perspective of Joomla. They'll have separate language codes, even though they're basically the one base language. And then I've set French, German and Spanish. So that's the first thing. Excuse me. The next thing is creating a content language. Now I've gone through and created a number of content languages as it describes here, and I've got the ones set up: Spanish, French and English, British English and New Zealand English. What I haven't done is install German as a language, as a content language. So what you will see in that case is that here's our Hello World application. Under administrator language, you've got DE, you've got all of the German stuff, and also under the site you've got DE. However, if I go to something like content articles, add new article, and then try and select the language of German, it's not there. So with having German installed, it creates all of the language files and puts them in the right place, so that you could, for example, set up a German administrator. But the next step is to set up the content language so that you can actually create articles, and in particular create Hello World records in that as well. So if I go to Hello World and create new, and I've got a language there, and there's no German there as well. So that's setting up the content language. The next thing is enable the language plugins. Now there are a couple of plugins and there are a couple of modules. So here are the four things here. The language filter is the first one, and it really is the key plugin from the perspective of making a site multilingual. If you go to extensions and plugins, I've already got this set as a search field. Here's the language filter. And this is really the key plugin, as I said. So whenever we're looking at our code, one of the things we want to check is is our site multilingual? And down here, you've got a check here. J language multilang is enabled. And this is basically true if this plugin is enabled. And if you disable that, then this will be false. So this is the key thing to set to make it multilingual. Now I should say that the idea of filtering by language, the plugin name gives you a little of the impression that it's going to do everything for you, but like a lot of things in Joomla, it's really up to you to do the filtering. So this plugin, you'll be able to determine whether the site is supposed to be multilingual, but then you still have to do the filtering within your code. So for example, you have to put in the where clause in your SQL statement to filter by language. There are some options around this filter. Language selection for new visitors. You can say that the site, when a new visitor comes, it will be either shown in the kind of default site language, or Joomla can try to determine the language to display the site in based on the browser settings. Automatic language change. That's, say, if you're displaying the home page in, say, Spanish, and someone comes along and sees it in Spanish and then logs in, but that person, that user has got a language of French associated with them, then if this is set, the automatic language change, whenever that person who's logged in, the site will automatically switch to French, because that's the language associated with that user. Item associations we're going to cover in a future step in the tutorial, hopefully the next one. And remove URL language code. If you look at here, we've got in our home page, we've got EN, which indicates that it's English. However, if I set this to be remove and say save it, you'll see that that should disappear. When I click the English home, the EN has disappeared. And that's really just for the default language. Okay, they won't do it for all of the other languages, it's just for the default language. Okay, so that's the language filter. The other filter the other plugin that we have is the language code plugin, which is again mentioned on this site here, enabling the language code plugin. So whenever you have some site like this, we'll just put the EN back on, and I look at this page. You can see up the top here, there's an HTML tag, HTML language equals ENGB. And what the language code plugin allows you to do is to change that. Now, why is that important? Well, if you've got, say, visitors to the site in the US and you want it to be high on a search engine's kind of rating, then the search engines, when they're delivering sites to the US, will look at what language this is in, and the language will be a factor in how much it is portrayed there. So if I change this to US, it means that whenever it's outputting ENGB, instead of outputting ENGB, it will output ENUS. So I'll just save that, and then I'll go back and just refresh this source. And you can see up here that it has changed it to ENUS. So that's that. I'll just close that. I'm just thinking I've probably left that as ENUS. Let me just go in and change that again. Okay, so the next stage is adding multilingual content. Now, in this tutorial, it goes through adding articles, but what we'll do is add categories and hello world records as really described here. So if I go back to our admin and go into hello world, and on categories, and you'll see the categories that I've added there. Really messages in French, salutation, mensajes in Spanish, and I've added a few subcategories associated with those, just a little bit more interesting. And then I've specified the language of each of those categories. Now, Joomla comes with categories supporting language, so you don't actually need to do anything to make that happen. And then what I've done is I've put in a number of messages and associated with those a variety of categories. So for example, good morning, I've put into this category formal, which is in the English area. And I've just gone through and really created a number of different messages or greetings and associated them with specific languages. Okay, so that's setting up the multilingual content. The next area is creating menus. So if I go to the menus, you'll see what has been set up. So if we look at the menus here, here is the original main menu. And what I've set up, English, French, New Zealand menu, which really is a little dummy one, a Spanish menu. So the main ones are the English, French and Spanish menus. And I've really set those up from scratch. However, if you are kind of converting an existing site from being a single language to multilingual, you probably want to start with your site, whatever language it's in, say English for example, and rename the existing main menu into the English menu, and then create a separate main menu which is going to have a language of all. I'll just go back there. And that way it will be less work. But what I've done is create each of those menus. So on the English menu, I've just put a number of menu items: a home, hello world, the messages, which refers to the category list. So menu items, this is referring to the category list here. This messages. And another message which is hidden, another menu item which is called message which is hidden, and you'll see there it's got a note Ajax on it. So if I go into that, and that is the one that we're going to pin our messages on if they're coming from the Ajax side of things. So down here on the right hand side you'll see Ajax, and over on the link type you'll see it's displaying menu no. All the other things are straightforward. English menu here, language over here. And done the same for the French menu. Kind of a welcome page, bonjour, salutation, salutation, nouvelle salutation, which is really just the ability to create the new hello world record. So as I click through these, and if I swap to French, you will see that here's the French menu over here. And if I swap to Spanish, here's the Spanish menu. Okay, it's quite important that you have one of these as set as the home. So in the same way as you had a home on the main menu, which had a star in it, when you click on a home for each of the language specific menus, you get a little flag. So here's the English one, and here's the Spanish one, just with a Spanish flag there. So that's creating menus. Duplicating your template for each language. It's not really necessary, but you can do it if you like. I've done it just for one of the French pages. So as you can see here, when I click on the French one, it comes up in a different color. And you just copy the default template and assign that template to whatever menu items, whatever style you want. Adding the language switcher is this next thing. So this again is one of our plugins. We've covered the language filter, language code. Sorry, this is a module, not a plugin. And this allows the users to switch language. So this is basically this little set of flags here. Right. I'm thinking I should have also mentioned that when you set up the menus, you have to assign them to modules. So if I look on the modules, you'll see that they're each of the menus here. If I go to the site. So here's our Spanish menu, and it's got a position, so you have to assign a position to each of the menus. English menu position 3, French menu position 7, and you notice it's over here rather than being up in the top left because it's a different position. So the language switcher is this little module. We've got it here on the site, and if we look down here, here's the language switcher, and you can define whatever text you want here in whatever language, and that's this bit here. And you have a variety of methods here of actually displaying the links to the different languages, but the little flags is really quite nice. The other extension, which you may well find quite useful, is on the administrator side, and it is called the multi-language status, and it's just a straightforward. You don't really have a lot of options with it, but if you enable that, then what happens is on the admin screen down at the bottom left here, you can see there's an option, multilingual status, and if you click that, it gives you kind of like a quick health report of all the multilingual aspects on your site. So if you miss out some of these things, it's going to cause problems. So this gives you a good view of how things are. For example, what I'll do is I'll go into our menus and go to our French menu. And I'll just click on this here. And this will have the effect of taking off the default home page for French here. Now if I click on my multilingual status, I can see down here, publish default home pages, that I've got something wrong. And if I go to my site and click on Spanish, for example, now we can see that the French flag is gone, so I can't switch to my French language. And the problem is that home page has been unset, and you can see a description there. So this is quite a useful little module for troubleshooting problems with the with the multilingual aspect of the site. So we'll go back here and click that on again. The other thing I forgot to mention was that you should remove the main menu. So if we go back on to Tools and Site, and you can see here that this main menu is disabled, so it doesn't appear. You still need it there with set to the language of all, but it should be set to disabled so that it doesn't appear. So that is basically the setup of the site. Let's look now at some of the code changes. Well, really, I suppose the data setup is nearly the most complex aspect of setting it multilingual. From the point of view of code, it's really quite easy. It's just that it needs to be done in various places. So for example, this, as I said, is the key test that we make to find out, is our site multilingual? And if it is multilingual, then we can get the language here. So this gets the language in the form en/GB or en/-US. So if we look at our languages table with PHPMyAdmin, this is the language code ENGB, FRFR, ESES, ENNZ, and whenever you're setting up the content languages, it creates records in this table, but you have to make sure that the language code is the same as you know, in the installed language. Here's our SEF little segment of the URL, so you're more free to define whatever you want for that, but the language codes have to be fixed, and that is what you get whenever you make this call, say factory get language get tag. And it's also what you do whenever you create something that has got a foreign language, in the sense that that is what you write to the database. So here's our hello world record. Our language field is here, and you can see that's the language code that is put in. And this is the kind of standard way of doing things in Joomla. And if you want to reap the benefit of the Joomla code, that's the way you should do it. So in terms of our code related to the multilingual aspect, we've obviously got a new field here. We've got a language field, which we have to populate and manage. So a lot of the code in this step is really about displaying the language, being able to change it and all that sort of stuff, adding it to our field definitions. That's all fairly straightforward. I'm not going to go through that. Then the other two things we need to do, we need to add in additional where clauses and sometimes order by clauses in our SQL queries if the person is looking at a specific language. So for example, if I'm in Spanish here, and I look at messages and go on down, I'm just going to get the Spanish messages. If I go to, say, for example, hola, and do a search here, even though there are lots of messages which are defined to be at this point, which is 00, which is somewhere off the coast of West Africa, there are lots of messages. defined at that latitude and longitude. The only ones that come back are the Spanish ones here. So I've done basically a where clause on the SQL query to just bring back the current language ones. And then the other thing we need to do is whenever we've got a call to JRoot, we need to have an additional parameter put in there which actually specifies the language. So for example, if we go down, you'll see plenty of examples of these sorts of things. Here is what this file is, our Hello World's model. So that is the model which is behind the display of our Hello World messages within the admin. And here we've got a little extra bit if we filter by language. So we can come along here and do search tools, select language, French, and just show the French ones. Here's, this is displaying the form for the front end. So when we display the form, I'll go back into English here, or a new message. You get a language here, and it's predefined to be English because that's what we're working in, English. And the thing that makes it predefined is this little bit here. So it just sets that form field attribute to be the language that we're currently working in. Here is just an addition to the query, so we're adding a where clause there. And down here is where we're calling JRoot. And we need to add in this query lang, where query lang is set to be this. So it's just really adding the language parameter into the set of query parameters, which are passed to JRoot underscore function. So as I say, it's basically the same sort of thing. You just have to do it multiple times in multiple places, depending on where your queries are, both in the admin and in the site side of things. Finally, something about language management considerations. Now, I'm doing this really just kind of managing the language strings for the tutorials, and I find that if you just try to use files like it's defined here, then you can really get into quite a great deal of trouble, because it can get quite confusing if you've got different files in different languages and you're adding things in and taking things out and that. I found using a spreadsheet was easier. I've just got, here's all the strings, and then here they are in English, here they are in French, and here they are in Spanish, and then this is kind of like a concatenation, so I can just do a cut and paste here and go back into something Notepad, and it brings them all together. However, that's because I'm kind of managing the strings and all of the translations. The way that they do in Joomla, if you look at the code, say for example DE, look at that, you'll see that all of these are alphabetically ordered. And in that way, you can quite easily find if there's something missing from one of your translation files. I was speaking to someone else who mentioned that the way he does it is to have separate sections, one for each version. So you have a set of kind of language strings for the base version, and then as you add versions into your component, you add sections on at the end, so it's really split by version of the code. If you're looking at things and looking at doing your own component and making it available to others, that's the sort of things you really need to think about. What's the best way to manage the translation strings? I suppose the default would be follow what Joomla does and order them alphabetically. The other thing is, how do you get all the translations? I've been just using word reference mostly, but there are a couple of translation services on the internet, which again someone mentioned to me. This is what I believe Joomla use, Crowdin. I have no idea what it's like, so I haven't looked at it at all for myself. The other person who mentioned that Joomla used this actually used this other product, TransFX, on his own platform. So there's a couple of translation services, and I'm sure there are more out there on the web, should you really want to get into this properly in a component. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there. Sorry, one little last thing was, if you go to extensions and languages, there is this thing called overrides. Now I've actually put an override in. One of the advantages of this little bit of functionality within Joomla is that if you see a bit of text or you wonder what's the value of this constant, you could look through the language string files, but sometimes that can be a bit awkward on Windows systems because you don't have such a handy utility as grep just at hand. So what you can do is go into this language override and then put in something like, what was that one? Sorry, I'll have to go back because I've forgotten which one it is. JField language description. Okay, JField language description. And I'm looking for a constant. JField. Oh, there it just comes up. And search. And it comes up with assign a language to this article. So the JField language description was what was used in JField language. There. And this is in our front-end form. JField language description. And if you look at its value here, it's assign a language to this article. And really what I wanted to have it was assign a language to this item. So you can put an override in here, and that's what I've done here. I've put an override. I've just said I'll assign a language to this item. So whenever I go to here, this is our front-end form, and hover over language, it comes up assign a language to this item. Whereas if I go to Spanish, it's probably got the Spanish equivalent. Asigne un idioma a este artículo. So it's got article there instead of item. The other thing you can do here is you can look for the value of the text. I'm going to come up again. And I'm looking in this case for a value. And that will then give me which translation strings actually have that in it. So you may find that useful sometime. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Thanks very much for watching. Bye.